Good morning. Good morning. I'm Peter Dubovský. I'm the president of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, and on the behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome all of you, and especially our dear guest speakers to this conference. The committee gathered here represents a wide range of perspectives and interests within the biblical scholarship. And while Professor Tobias Niklas, Professor Luigi Santopaolo, and myself have helped and thought through the organizing this event, our special thanks must go to Professoressa Daniela Shalabba, who is truly the mastermind behind this conference. So thank you very much. We are really privileged to have such distinguished scholars among us as you are here, and we are all familiar with the challenge, what does it mean to switch between languages? And for example, in my language, we don't have the articles. So if you are a German and you listen to me, you immediately know this man is not a German or Italian, because articles are useless in my language. So switching from one language to one to the other, it's a process, in this process where metaphors can falter and allusions shift. And some allusions doesn't work anymore when you shift from one language to the other. And when we attempt to speak about the divine, it's even worse. And it is my hope that our time together here will help us bridge those linguistic and conceptual gaps. I wish you all fruitful dialogues, insightful exchanges, and many friendly moments together. And allow me to describe in few words what we are going to do now. Most of us know how difficult is this experience of changing languages. At a pivotal moment in history, Jewish scholars, we can call them Jewish scholars, decided to translate the Bible into Greek. We can rightly call this moment watershed in the history of the biblical studies. This was one of the most courageous acts in the history of Jewish religion. How does one express sacred concepts in a foreign, meaning Greek, language? This conference explores how ancient Jewish and Christian writings in Koine Greek address the fundamental challenge of theological language. Specifically, it examines how they express the nature, speech, and action of God using human language, in this case, Greek. A language that must constantly balance traditional loyalty with expressive innovation. The inquiry of this conference focuses on the development and the content of what we can say, God talk between ancient Judaism and early Christianity, taking into account the literary, cultural, and social world of the Greco-Roman era. So I hope this will be a nice moment for us. It will be, I hope, a challenge for all of us to understand what and how the Greek world express the divine. So thank you very much for all you, and thank you very much once again to the organizing committee. Thank you. And now I would like to invite the first two speakers, Professor Roberto Nicolai and Luigi Santopaolo. So allow me to introduce Professor Roberto Nicolai. He's a full professor in Greek language and literature at the Università Sapienza, Department of Scienze dell'Antichità. He is, and if you look at his bibliography, it's really impressive. There is more than 200 contributions, mainly on Greek historical and geographical literature and on Attic tragedies. Something like, for example, La Storiografia della Educazione Antica, Studi sui Socrate, and so on. And I would like to say one word that he's a very good friend of our institute. He helped us quite a lot. And under his guidance, his department reached the highest appreciation in the world. His department was ranked like the best department of classical languages in the world, beating even Harvard and Oxford. And I think it's thanks to you. So please, floor is yours.
Thank you for this presentation. Thank you, everyone. As Aristotle remarks, to theon legeta imen pollakos, in speaking of being. The same could, however, be said of the divine. Not only are there several terms used to denote divinity and the divine, but these terms themselves may display a plurality of meanings and reference. In Greek, alongside the noun theos, I shall examine the substantive neuter toteion and the noun daimon. The noun theos raises no particular difficulty at the level of basic meaning, at least so long as one is content with a neutral rendering and does not attempt to reconstruct in each instance the specific conception of the divine that underlies its use. The picture is more complex, however, in the cases of toteion and daimon. The Leader Scott Jones Greek-English lexicon, sub voce teios, distinguishes three semantic categories. The second, which is of interest here, is the substantival use of toteion, glossed as the divinity. The first example cited is Herodotus. At the very outset of his reply to Croesus, Solon alludes to the envious nature of the divine, a force that overturns all human claims and expectations. The second passage is from Book 3. The reference is to the winged serpents that guard the trees producing incense. Here, the pronoie of the divine, in its wisdom, ensures that they do not multiply excessively. An occurrence predating Herodotus is listed third. This is Aeschylus, Coephory, libation bearers. The formulation in a passage with textual difficulties, the formulation concerning the divine principle that prevails is not in question. Further, Thucydides, Book 5. The Lacedaemonians advance slowly to the sound of the auloi, but Thucydides specifies that this does not occur for any reason connected with the divine. Rather, it is intended to maintain the regularity of their advance and to prevent the formation from breaking up. The final passage cited in the first group is Plato, Phaedrus, to which we shall return shortly. Within the same semantic category, under point 2, the entry gives, in an abstract sense, divinity. The first example, again being drawn from the Phaedrus. As for daimon, the Leader Scott Jones identifies as its primary meaning God, goddess, but at the same time adds the qualification, but more frequently, of the divine power, the deity. A second sense is given as the power controlling the destiny of individuals, hence one's lot or fortune. Within this category falls the further specification personified as the good or evil genius of a family or person. After the plural usage defined as souls of men of the golden age, the entry concludes with spiritual or semi-divine being inferior to the gods. As I've noted in other instances, the otherwise commendable effort to provide precise equivalence in modern languages tends, in this case, to impose distinctions that reflect our own conceptual categories, rather than those of the ancient world. What I propose, therefore, is a reflection on the role of the divine and on the lexicon of the divine in three texts composed between 472 and 370 BC, Aeschylus' Persians, Thucydides, and Plato's Phaedrus. I shall conclude with a passage from Euripides, an author to whom coherent and systematic views on religion have often been attributed, overlooking the fact that he is, above all, a dramatist. In Aeschylus' Persians, the notion of one or more indeterminate forms of the divine is articulated through a range of expressions. An unspecified divine power is attested here, 101 and following, where the speaking voice is that of the chorus in connection with the Moira that compelled the Persian to wage war and to devastate cities, Theoten. For by the will of the gods' fate has held sway since ancient time, and so on. Addressing the queen, the Corypheus declares, the Corypheus apprehension is tied to the possibility that an ancient daimon Palaios, may have withdrawn from the Persian army, thereby bringing about its defeat. After recounting her prophetic dream to the chorus, the queen continues. The queen explains that after purifying her hands, she approached the altar to offer a sacrifice to unspecified divine powers, endowed with an apotropic function. Here, where the speaker is the angelos, the messenger, daimon Tis is followed shortly thereafter by the noun Theoi. An unspecified daimon is said to have destroyed the Persian army, while the gods, likewise left unspecified, have saved the city of Athens. Shortly thereafter, the same speaker attributes the defeat to a divine agency described as Alastor e Kakos daimon here. A daimon who has deceived the Persians is again identified as responsible for the defeat by the queen, Ostygne daimon, hateful divine. It is an unspecified god who causes the river Strymon to freeze. Again, at the end of Oasis of the messenger, a reference is made to a god who was brought suffering upon the Persians. In the comment of the Corypheus that follows, daimon appears once more. And again, in the first Stasimon, the chorus laments the suffering of parents who have lost their children. Finally, the queen, before performing the ritual of summoning her husband Darius, utters lines of particular relevance to our inquiry. In this passage, alongside daimon, there appear the tantaia that come from the gods. No distinction is articulated, but rather a set of undifferentiated divine powers governing the course of human affairs. A group of chthonic divinities, together with Heart, Hermes, and the ruler of the dead, is invoked in these verses by the chorus in order that the psyche of Darius may rise from the heart. Here, it is Darius himself whom the chorus addresses both as daimon and as theos. And here, in the stichometia between the queen and the ghost of Darius, it is once again an unspecified daimon that is held responsible for Xerxes' madness. Megas daimon, a great daimon. The Greek divinities outraged by Xerxes are mentioned here. Xerxes has destroyed the statues and temples. The equivalence between theoi and daimones is particularly significant, as it suggests that the distinction between theoi and daimones is here neutralized. What is at stake is not the ontological status of the divine figures, but their presence as recipients of cult and as loci of sacrilege. An extension of the meaning of daimon is found here, where it refers to onslaught, that is, to the condition determined by the divine. It is again the daimon responsible for the defeat whom the queen addresses after the shade of Darius has vanished from sight. And here, Moira and daimon are once again invoked by Xerxes, and again, the chorus invokes the daimon. And the final passage to be seen in this context, spoken by the chorus, is this. We should not expect Aeschylus to possess detailed knowledge of Iranian religion, nor to aim at providing the audience with precise information about the divinities invoked, as it's sometimes assumed in modern scholarship. Tragedy is neither a treatise on the history of religion, nor a form of historical reportage. At the same time, Greek divine figures and divine agencies are by no means absent. Moira, Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, and so on. Even here, however, one should not posit the representation of a coherent Greek theology transposed onto Persia, nor is the principle double determination, divine and human, subjected to systematic analysis, or articulated in a manner comparable, for instance, to later theological discussion on free will from the Church Fathers onward. The principle is clearly formulated, but without any sustained engagement with theological problems. One might consider, for example, the gnome at 742. Nevertheless, when man hastens to his own undoing, the god too participates with him. The Aeschylean passages allow us to formulate a question of no small importance. How are we to compare texts that articulate a structured or at least developed in the theology such as those of the Old and New Testament, or even the writings of the Church Fathers, with texts of a different genre that are not intended to convey a coherent and systematic body of religious knowledge. In scholarship on 5th century Attic tragedy, one often encounters references to the theology of a given tragedian. But the works of Aeschylus or Euripides were designed for performance, set either in a remote past or, as in the case of the Persians, in geographically and culturally distant settings. What is created on stage is a constructed world. In the case of the Persian, we have a composite that blends available information about Persia with distinctly Greek elements. The result is a dramatic world that exists only within the space of the theater and for the duration of the performance. Meaning emerges from the dialectical interplay among the characters and between the characters and the chorus. It is therefore methodologically unsound to attempt to reconstruct a systematic body of thought from literary genres that are not themselves systematic by nature. The same applies to Plato's dialogues. Thucydides. The choice of Thucydides may at first appear surprising, since a substantial part of modern scholarship has presented Thucydides as a scientific historian, with little or no interest in religious phenomena. I shall focus in particular on passages in which no specific divinity is mentioned, but rather a god or gods who remain undefined. The first occurrence of Theos appears here within the speech of the Corinthians, where it refers to the gods as guarantors of oaths. Again, in a speech, as still in the plural, Theos occur in the speech of Sthenelaidas. The adjective Theos appears with reference to the divine law, which did not serve to sanction agreements. We are in the Stasis at Corcyra, Book 3. But the more interesting passages are in the dialogue between the Melians and the Athenians, with the Melians express their confidence in a tuque that derives from the divine. Tuque ek tu teiu. The Athenian reply is dense with references to the divine. The law of the stronger is presented here as a necessity grounded in nature, both in the human and the divine sphere. Accordingly, the Athenians see nothing unjust in their conduct. The divine is here assimilated to the same logic of necessity that governs human action. The appel to theīon serves to reinforce the principle of domination. And the speech of Nicias in the Sicilian expedition, with many references to the gods. Across these speeches, reference to gods or to a more diffuse divine principle recur in clearly defined rhetorical context. Their function is internal to the economy of the speech, to persuade or to encourage the audience. The most significant passage is the Athenian reply to the Melians. The divine and the human spheres are both governed by the law of the stronger. Thucydides does not exclude the religious sphere from history. Rather, he refrains from integrating it into his analysis of events, leaving reference to the divine within the speeches he attributes to the characters of his work. And now, Phaedrus. The Phaedrus is a dialogue in which the presence of the divine and of gods is especially important. The setting is in a natural environment populated by divine presences, nymphs and muses. Theïos o topos, hypoton nymphon, tus entopius theus, the gods of the place, and so on. The first occurrence of Theïos is found here, where Socrates is speaking. Socrates and Phaedrus have just arrived at the plane tree beneath which the rest of the dialogue will unfold. We cannot see all the passages. Here may be interesting to see the Bacchic Dionysiac inspiration of Socrates and the assimilation of Socrates' speech to dithyrambic poetry. And then the Theia Philosophia, the divine philosophy. Tis daimon and to daimonion, and so on. But I would like to stress this passage, Theos et Theion, or Eros. Socrates is speaking about Eros, and he defines Eros, Theos et Theion, a god or something divine. We have not the time to see all the passages I've collected, but Theia Mania, another important idea in Plato's Phaedrus, and we should arrive at concluding. In the Phaedrus, the presence of the divine, both in the setting of the dialogue and as a condition that allows one to approach the truth, is pervasive. References to personal deities are not lacking, yet the overall impression is that of the divine that resists definition, like Eros, Theos, et Theion. In the Phaedrus, the shift between Theos, Theion, daimonion, daimon, points to different levels at which the divine is apprehended, corresponding to a personal agent, a quality, and a mode of manifestation. Plato is not a systematic philosopher. He does not write treatises, but dialogues, in which what matters is not so much the result as the path that is followed. It would therefore be mistake to look for a structured theology in his work. I shall conclude with a passage appropriate for closing. It is a choral ode from Euripides' Bacchae, the last tragedy of this author, but also the end of an era. Euripides composed it in the final years of the Peloponnesian War, and it was staged posthumously at Athens, most probably in 405 BC. In the Bacchae, the divine emerges as a force that precedes and exceeds any attempt at definition. The divine strength, making itself felt in its effects rather than a true stable designation. Euripides addressed the introduction into Greece of the Dionysiac cult on reflection on the divine and on relations between gods and men occupies a privileged place in the tragedy. The chorus comments on the action, but the maxim it articulates should not be taken as the message of the play. They are often traditional formulations, expressing shared assumptions. The meaning emerges from the dialectical confrontation among the characters. What matters here is that the strength of an unspecified divine is emphasized, and that the indeterminate character of the daimonion is indicated. The presence in authors such as Aeschylus, Euripides, and Plato, alongside certain deities of the pantheon, of references to an undefined divine might suggest an implicit adherence to Eleatic doctrine, with a being that displaces anthropomorphic gods. Nothing could be more mistaken, both for Aeschylus and for Plato and for Euripides. Plato's relation to Eleatic thought has been extensively studied, especially in connection with Parmenides, but not only there. What Remeir and substantially emphasizes is the dialogic character of his work. Dialogue is not merely a form, but the deepest substance of his thought. Dialogue is a process that progresses by testing partial insights, and where dialectic argument reaches its limits, turns to myth and to poetry. The recurrence of an undefined divine points to a shift of attention. What comes into focus is not the identity of the god, but the conditions under which the divine is recognized and encountered. Thank you.
So we can move to the second talk of this morning, and our second presenter is Professor Luigi Santopaolo. Professor Luigi Santopaolo is Professore Straordinario of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, and when we are speaking about speaking in different languages, I think that he would prefer to speak in Naples dialect, but it wouldn't be accepted.
It's a language, not a dialect.
Oh, sorry. I deeply apologize. So Professor Luigi Santopaolo wrote his dissertation under the guidance of Professor Augustinus Gianto on the book of Daniel, and he is a professor of Hebrew, Aramaic, and apocalyptic literature at the PBI. He will speak about, his talk is When God enters the frame, Kai Idou, and the atemporal overlap of vision in the Septuagint Daniel and Greek Enoch. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Dubovský. Thank you, Daniela. I want to thank you personally for everything you did for this conference. Okay, my topic is quite basic. I will talk about the divine syntax. We could call that this way, because it's about how God appears in visions in the Bible, specifically in the Greek Bible in this case. But of course, this is connected as well with the Hebrew and Aramaic texts. My aim today is to argue that in the visionary Greek of Septuagint, Kai Idou, that is the evidential particle that I'm going to analyze in this paper with the connected verbal forms that are used with Kai Idou, should not be reduced to a merely visual or generic presentative particle. In the passages that matter most for visionary discourse, especially Zechariah, Ezekiel, and Daniel 7, the formula functions more precisely as a Semitic presentative with a strong mirrative profile. My claim is that the formula does something more than point to an object in the visual field. It marks the emergence of a scene into the seer's awareness, especially when it appears together with participles and imperfective forms. In those cases, the text does not simply identify a referent, it keeps the scene open and it creates an overlap between perception and event. This is why I will suggest that the formula contributes to a specific visionary temporality. I do not mean abstract timelessness in a philosophical sense. I mean rather that ordinary narrative sequence is suspended. The event is not just reported as having happened. It is made to unfold before the seer. I will proceed in 4 steps. First, I will distinguish mirrativity from simple evidentiality. Second, I will explain why *Kaidu* in visionary discourse does more than mark visual access. Third, I will comment on Zechariah, Ezekiel, and Daniel 7. And finally, I will close with Greek Enoch, which should not be forgotten because it extends the same apocalyptic logic beyond the Septuagintal corpus. I make it a little larger. Let me begin then with the theoretical distinction that makes the argument possible. The theoretical distinction is straightforward, but it is crucial. Evidentiality marks the source of information. I saw, I heard, it was reported. Mirrativity, by contrast, marks the content as newly appearing to consciousness. Sudden discovery, unprepared awareness, the onset of cognitive salience. That distinction matters especially in vision reports because those reports often already contain the evidential verb. The text already says eidon or theorun or blepo. So once the visual source has already been marked, the additional work of idú cannot simply be to say again that something is seen. What it adds is the marking of new perceptual emergence. It indicates that something is not only visible, but now appears before the seer as a newly salient event. So the operational test I am using this passage is simple. First, identify the verb of vision. Second, ask what *Kaidu* adds beyond that. Third, observe whether what follows is imperfective or participial. If it is, then the scene is not closed by but unfolding, and the formula acquires a mirrative presentifying force. So the difference is not between seeing or not seeing. The difference is between seeing as a report and seeing as a sudden disclosure. An ideal place to see these is Zechariah, where the formula is almost programmatic. Let us start with Zechariah 5:1-2. Here the visionary sequence is already very clear. The seer turns, lifts his eyes, sees, and then we get *Kaidu*. So the visual frame has already been established before the formula appears. Now let's read the Greek text here. Kai epestreps, kai eratus oftalmusmo, kai eidon, kai du drepanon petopenon. As you can see in the first verse, the object of the vision is introduced by *Kaidu*. In the next verse, the *Kaidu* disappeared. Epen ego oro drepanon petomenon. What is the difference here? In the first part of the vision, the object is new, is never seen. That's why *Kaidu* expresses the idea of mirrativity. In the second part of the vision, the object is already known, so we don't need any evidential to specify an object that is already known by the seer. And this is the big problem about the translation that seems to be too neutral about this kaidu, because it's just this behold and behold that is an angelic language, we say, because only angels now say behold and behold. It's not quite common among normal people to say and behold when they speak, I suppose. And even in Italian, we don't say ed ecco, it sounds very strange. But in our translations of the Bible, that is quite common, and that is a big problem, because it does not reflect the idea of mirativity. As you know, as this is a Hebrew, Aramaic calque, of course, in Greek, because this is not typical Greek. I mean, classical Greek would be shocked by this kind of constructions that do not reflect the idea of what the syntax even of the perceptual verbs is in the classical Greek. But in Hebrew and Aramaic, there are several proposals for a better translation for this kind of evidential v'hine or va'aru in Hebrew or Aramaic, like he saw surprisingly with surprise or something like that, that could express better the idea of the kaidu differently from the simple visual perception. Sorry. The decisive word here, of course, is not only kaidu, but the petomenon that comes after, that is participle, of course. The object is not simply there as a static referent, it is there while flying. And that matters. If the construction were merely a neutral presentative, the clause could have introduced the object nominally. But instead, what breaks into the scene is not just a thing, it is a thing in kinetic manifestation. The line therefore does not mean merely I saw a scroll in the Hebrew text or a sickle in the Greek text and then I describe it. It means I saw and there it was flying. That is exactly the kind of context in which a mirative reading is stronger than a simple visual one. The visual channel is already overmarked, eidon, so kaidu interpreted just as another visual verb or verbal form or something coming from the root id would be a sort of pleonastic form in this case, but this pleonasm must mean something because it's not necessary. So kaidu adds not visibility, but sudden salience. In other words, the object does not simply enter the syntax, it enters the seer's awareness. I move to another text. Here we have another example, Zechariah 6:1. In Zechariah 6:1, the mechanism is essentially the same, but the spatial emergence is even more explicit. Again, the visionary frame comes first, the seer turns, lifts his eyes, sees, and then kaidu introduces the scene. And you can see here we have the construction of kai-eidon, kai-idu, and then the participle that is constructed with the kaidu as well. This idea is useful to express a sort of contemporaneity or simultaneity between the action of the seer and what he is seeing. But the point is that all the narrative that comes after in the vision will be expressed with the same participles. So the idea is to express a sort of overlap of actions in the vision that could be connected with the idea of atemporality of the vision, because everything that happens in apocalyptic visions is contemporaneous. There is not before and there is not later in apocalyptic vision. There is everything in the same time, something that could be expressed just through cinematographic science, because textual science is not, art is not enough to represent something like this kind of overlapping, contemporaneity, simultaneity. I see everything in the same moment. There is not a real narrative behind the text. So, the key participle is ekporeuomena. The chairs are not just present, they are coming out, they are emerging into the view. So once again, if idú were only a neutral presentative, its recurrent combination with dynamic participles would be harder to explain. What we have is not just introduction, but onset. The scene is staged as a renewed visual access to something that is becoming perceptually available at that very moment. This is why the formula has mirative force. It marks not just a referent, but the sudden salience of a moving scene. And we find, now we pass to the description of God. You can understand how useful can be this syntax when we are talking about the direct divine revelation. Because in God there is no time, there is a sense of timelessness. And when the prophet, the seer, is seeing God, the description is not properly narrative. We have this overlapping effect to show that God is something out of the normal narrative assessment, I mean. And this is the case about a description of God. In this case, we have another example of construction, as you can see, because you have kaedon, kaidu as in the previous text, but in this case, the verb is not in the participle, but we have another construction that is such efficient as the participle, we could say, because you have ergeto, you have an imperfect, that is the alternative verbal form for this kind of construction to express the idea, not of a real past, just a past, I mean, but the durative contemporaneity that can be expressed also by this form. But in this text, we see also a sort of inconsistency or a combination of two verbal forms. Because in the first case, you have the imperfect. In the second case, you have the participle. So both the construction are combined. That is why this text is interesting. The wind was coming, the fire was flashing. This is a divine revelation. Nothing here is pictured as a completed whole. The theophanic scene is held open in an imperfective mode. This is where I would speak not of timelessness in abstract metaphysical sense, but of supra-sequentiality. Narrative time is not abolished, but ordinary succession is suspended. The event is still arriving while being seen. So the divine manifestation is not merely recollected as something that happened in the past of the narrative. It is presented as a revelation in the act of happening before the seer. And that, I think, is one of the most important functions of this syntax in visionary literature. But now we pass to one of the main texts. I mean, that is Daniel 7:13. I mean, one of the most famous texts, I think. Daniel 7:13 is the key. On one side, you have the Old Greek, of course, and the other side, you have Theodotion. Is the key comparative passage, because here we can observe two Greek forms side by side. The chapter is already explicitly framed as a night vision, so we are in the world of dream and vision from the start, exactly the setting in which the Semitic background of the formula matters most. Let's look at the text. As you can see here, so far we found an aorist for eidon in the construction. So usually you have eidon kai იდού. In this case, you have a theorun that is an imperfect, that is perfectly combined what comes after. Why? Because the idea of contemporaneity between the perceptual verb and the object of the vision is perfectly expressed by this kind of imperfect. This imperfect reflects the Aramaic text in which we find the periphrastic construction of the verb hava, like the verb to be, plus the participle in the Aramaic that is perfectly expressed by this kind of imperfect because it expresses an idea of something that is durative as well. And kaidu, and here you have the imperfect as well in the object of the vision. In the Theodotion is even more interesting because you have a periphrastic construction given by erchomenos, the participle, with the verb eimi in the imperfect, something that is even closer to the Aramaic text as a construction. The morphology differs, but the discourse function does not. In the Old Greek, we have the imperfect erketo. In Theodotion, we have the participial expression erchomenos en, but both versions avoid a closed perfective event. Neither says simply he came, but say in effect, he was coming. That is fundamental. The human-like figure is not introduced as a completed arrival, but as an event still in progress at the moment of perception. And again, the evidential work is already done by a theoron. Daniel is already watching, so Ιδού must be doing something else. It marks the emergence of the figure into Daniel's awareness as a sudden, visionarily salient event. This, I think, is the clearest example of what I'm calling an overlapping syntax of vision. The time of seeing and the time of what is seen overlap. The apparition is both perceived and still unfolding. That is why this syntax is so apt for divine or transcendent agency. It resists reduction to a simple narrated past. And this is precisely why Enoch should stand at the end of the argument. This is the last part. But in Enoch, do not expect directly the Ιδού. There is a little change. I'm sorry. I didn't write Enoch, but and I didn't translate it if it was translated. I want to close the textual dossier with the Greek Enoch, which must not be forgotten. For the projected slide, I've used the first Enoch 9, but another interesting text is the chapter 14, where you can find an interesting vision. In the visionary language of Enoch, the key point here is the same as before, non-perfective advent. The line presents divine arrival in an open form. He comes. The emphasis is not on completed arrival, but on manifestation in progress. I know that one of the options was to translate that as a future. I mean, a present for a future to mean something that is going to happen. But this kind of translation actually does not reflect a possible, a Semitic substratum, because the idea is that something is happening now, is about to happen, it will happen. Everything is combined in visionary language because the time of the vision is not a real time. So it's difficult here to speak about just a future as something that is not still happening. It's something that happens and probably is going to happen and will happen after. Now, strictly speaking, this verse does not reproduce on its surface the exact formula Ιδού, but it belongs to the same apocalyptic grammar of manifestation. It extends the same visionary habitus we have already seen. Yes, I'm finished. We have already seen in Ezekiel and Daniel. And at this point, in the oral comments, I would remind the audience that behind this projected verse, there stands the broader visionary horizon of 1 Enoch 14, where the ascent vision unfolds as a field of clouds, mist, stars, lightning, and winds, carrying the visionary upward. So Enoch is not an appendix, it is an apocalyptic enlargement of the same syntax of manifestation. We have different strategies for translating or for meaning something that was clearly expressed in Semitic languages and became a sort of pattern for the syntax. In conclusion, in the visionary Greek Septuagint, Ιδού is best described not as a merely visual particle, but as a Semitic presentative with mirative force. The reason is clear. The verb of seeing already supplies the evidential basis. What Ιδού adds is the marking of a scene as newly emerging into awareness. When the formula is joined with participles and imperfective forms, forms such as petomenon, ekporeuomen, ercheto, and erchomenos en, the effect is not simple identification, but presentification. What is seen as coming, emerging, flying, flashing. This is why these texts do not simply narrate a vision, they stage vision, and in doing so, they render divine manifestation as supra-sequential. not outside time altogether, but no longer reducible to ordinary narrative succession. So the vision is not merely seen, it is made to happen before the seer. Thank you.